So this is part 2 of the video lecture for week 10 of career development theories, and we were talking in the previous video about task approach skills in career decision making. And so it makes sense that individuals often apply their typical task approach skills that they've learned through studying or working to career decision making. So if you are working with a client who seems to have inaccurate observations about themselves or about occupations, you may need to question when you're working with clients where their impressions came from and ensure that you do provide accurate information to them in the decision-making process. There are some strategies that you as a counselor can use when working with clients that are part of social learning theory, and some of these you will be learning to do throughout the program. The 4 different types of strategies that social learning theory looks at are reinforcement, role models, role-playing, and simulation. So we'll look at each of these in turn. So in social learning theory, the reinforcement technique is considered to be one of the most important techniques and really needs to be applied throughout the decision-making process. You want to provide positive reinforcement to clients. The more positive reinforcement that you provide to them, that increases their chances that they're going to continue engaging in behaviors that are helpful to them throughout their career development process. So as an example, you could have a client who is working very hard at their job search, and even though they're not actually getting any concrete results yet, you can play an important role in reinforcing that they're doing the right things and that if they keep doing those things, ultimately they will get some results. So reinforcement can influence clients' observations of their own capacities, interests, and values, and counselor reinforcement can assist in the accomplishment of career counseling goals. As a counselor, you need to be viewed as and to take on the role of a reinforcer. If you're using skills like encouragement, which you'll be learning in the needs assessment course, you'll automatically, fall into this reinforcing role. It can include expressions of excitement or appreciation or recognition that a client has worked hard, but you must be very careful not to reinforce only things you, as the counselor, think are right or good based on your own values or perceptions, or to fall into kind of a parental approving role. So we want to reinforce, we want to acknowledge and appreciate the things that the client is doing, and at the same time not seem like we're, parents approving or disapproving of their behavior. So I want to have you just look in the textbook there's a counselor-client interaction in the textbook at the top of page 360. And if you're working with the e-copy of the book and don't have the page numbers accessible, this is in chapter 13, and it's under the heading Counselor Behavioral Strategies in the reinforcement section. If you read down a little bit in that section, you'll see an example of a client and counselor interaction. So the part that I want you to look at specifically is where the client says, "I just got an A on my Latin exam," and the counselor says, "That's terrific. I know how important that was to you." The client says, "It makes me feel as if I can go on to college and to a real good one." The counselor says, "It makes you feel good about what you can accomplish academically." So the counselor has clearly reinforced and responded very positively to what the client has achieved. If you are not using reinforcement appropriately, if you could consider if the counselor had maybe not thought in the back of their mind this, so what, they got a good mark on Latin, how is that relevant to anything? And came up with these kinds of responses. So here are 2 examples. Client says, "I just got an A on my Latin exam." The counselor A says, "I guess that's good, although there are not many jobs where that would be useful." Counselor B says, "Well, I guess it at least shows that you can do well in school." So, what's wrong with these responses? Well, what's wrong is that this counselor A and B, Both missed, they took a very narrow view of the client's success. They don't see the relevance of getting a good mark on a Latin exam and miss the chance to help the client see how success in this one area academically may mean that they can succeed in many other areas, and really kind of deflated the client, who was clearly feeling pretty positive in the way that they talked about getting this good mark. So don't be that counselor A or B. You want to be the counselor that's depicted in the textbook, who gives a very positive response to reinforce for the client that that was a positive achievement that they accomplished. A second behavioral strategy in social learning theory is the idea of using role models. And role models can provide valuable associative learning experiences. So as a counselor, you can assist clients by acting as or providing role models. You may, for example, provide videos. Maybe you have access to job shadowing opportunities that you could provide to the client. And you can also identify role models from the client's past or current life if available, or they may know people who might know someone who could be a role model for them, or mentor them, or show them what they need to know about a particular occupation. So it's important to help clients get accurate information by looking at people who are working in occupations, for example, and being successful in them. Another aspect is the idea of role playing. This can be used to help clients learn new behaviors. And again, you will be getting exposed to doing role plays, learning how to role play with clients. And so this can be used to help clients learn things like handling job interviews, information interviews, networking. It could be set up in a couple of ways. For example, the counselor maybe could play the client in a job interview and the client plays the interviewer, or it could be done in reverse, where the counselor acts as the interviewer and the client is the applicant. And when you're doing role plays, they can be recorded and analyzed to help the client strengthen or develop skills. And it's important when doing role plays, and again, we will teach you how to do this, to provide both positive and constructive feedback. So encouragement is really important when you're doing role plays with clients, taking small steps, breaking things down so that the client can really gradually build up their confidence in, for example, job interviews. So role playing is a very common technique that is used in the field. And again, we will teach you how to do that. Another technique used in social learning theory is the idea of simulations, where the client can practice some tasks in an occupation to simulate a career experience. Many educational settings provide those kinds of simulations. For example, nursing students in a nursing program, before they go out on clinicals, they often do simulated clinical activities right in the classroom. Getting hands-on exposure to these types of activities is more helpful in making career decisions than just watching videos or reading about occupations. Often we don't know till we actually do something whether we're going to enjoy it. So it's important, if you're going to set up simulation opportunities, that you ensure that the experiences provide tasks that are doable for the client and relevant to their interests. You may have to get creative to find ways to experience, for the client to experience simulations. Krumholtz himself created job kits that gave students a chance to experience tasks that are common in a specific occupation. So depending on the nature of the work that you do, you may in fact want to explore some of these ways of creating simulated experiences for clients. We want to also look at happenstance learning theory, which is part of Krumholtz's social learning theory. And the emphasis here is on learning. And I'll just read this quote to you from Krumholtz, who says that the goal of career counseling is to facilitate the learning of skills, interests, beliefs, values, and work habits, and personal qualities that enable each client to create a satisfying life within a constantly changing work environment. So we can see that here the emphasis is on learning and growth, which makes sense. Throughout our lives, we don't stay static. We do learn new skills. We sometimes develop new interests. Our values sometimes change. We learn new work habits. So all of this reflects a very dynamic view of the individual throughout their lifetime of career development. So the emphasis is on learning about the self and the environment rather than just simply making choices. And Krumholtz and his colleagues believe that individuals need to be prepared to make adjustments as their abilities and interests and the social, educational, and occupational environments change. So this makes, perfect sense. You can think, for example, about someone who perhaps early in their career were able to take on a very physical type of occupation, but as they aged and got into a later phase of their life, that maybe they had to make adjustments to accepting that they maybe could not do that occupation. One example I can think of is when I worked in the hospital. We sometimes had nurses who were wonderful nurses, but they got injured and could no longer continue to meet the physical demands of the work. So quite often they would look to other types of work within the hospital setting, such as being a nurse educator or a consultant of some sort. So that's an example of how one has to make an adjustment as their abilities change throughout life. So happenstance learning theory looks at 4 different criteria that do influence the goals of career counseling. So the first is that the goal of career counseling is to help clients learn to take actions to achieve more satisfying career and personal lives, not to make a single career decision. So it's not a one-time event. As we know now, we do not just choose one occupation and stay in that for the rest of our life. At least that used to be the common model, and it certainly is not today. Career counseling, and sorry, I made a little mistake there, that should be 2 L's, is viewed as a process in which clients make changes based on what they learn. So again, this is an evolving, changing process throughout our life. And happenstance learning theory also sees the concepts of career and personal as closely intertwined. And we talked about this near the beginning of the course, that certainly when your career is going well, it affects your personal life, and vice versa. If there's a problem in your career, it often does affect your personal life. If there's a problem in your personal life, it does often affect us in our work lives. So we can see that those 2 things are really closely intertwined. A second criteria is that career assessments are used to stimulate learning, not to match personal characteristics with occupational characteristics. So we can see here in this statement how different this is from trait and factor theory, which in fact does try to match personal traits with occupational characteristics. And it's not that one is more accurate than the other. These are just different theories, different ways of looking at individuals' career development. So within happenstance learning theory, it says that the counselor should focus on how information from assessments can help clients to learn about themselves and take action. So the emphasis is on helping clients to learn about themselves in an evolving manner with an eye to future growth and change. The third criteria is that clients learn to engage in exploratory actions as a way of generating beneficial unplanned events. And we'll talk a little bit more about these unplanned events in just a moment. But happenstance learning theory sees unplanned events as common and necessary components in every person's career. So unplanned or accidental occurrences and even mistakes can be an opportunity for learning. And then the fourth criteria is that the success of counseling is assessed by what the client accomplishes in the real world outside of the counseling session. So the happenstance learning theory sees the counselor's role as helping the client to take action and make decisions about actions to take as a result of the actual counseling session. So it's very nice to sit and talk to the client, but ultimately you want them to go out there and take some steps to change their situation, improve their situation, achieve the goals that they would like to achieve. And Krumholtz even recommends asking a client to email the counselor when they have followed up, or to set up a follow-up session to discuss actions that have been taken. Again, you don't want to come across like a parental or teaching kind of person where they have to report back to you, or they have homework and they've got to do it by a certain deadline. We want to empower the client to feel as though they own these actions, and that will encourage them and motivate them to then follow through. I also want to, before we end this lecture, look at the notion of planned happenstance. So this is part of Krumholtz's theory. It looks at the importance of the impact of chance events on individuals' lives, and this was originally called planned happenstance, but is now part of happenstance learning theory. So the basic concept here is that change is a constant, and that individuals need to respond to and capitalize on new, unexpected, and unplanned events that occur in their lives. So happenstance learning theory recognizes the importance of chance events in people's lives and promotes the idea of taking advantage of chance events. So this is called planned happenstance. So counselors can help clients to actually generate more chance events, which can lead to more opportunities. So an example of planned happenstance is that, let's say you are trying to get into a particular field and you go to a networking event that is related to that field. And at that event, you talk to a whole lot of people, but you happen to talk to one person who takes an interest in your background, and in fact, invites you to maybe submit a resume or come and talk to them. And the next thing you know, you're meeting with them and they're offering you a job or a contract. So that's planned happenstance. You didn't go to the event planning to meet that individual person who was going to offer you a job, but as a result of kind of creating that opportunity to put yourself in that situation, the opportunity came about. So think about maybe an unplanned event or chance occurrence that has changed the course or direction of your life or career. This might have been a positive or a negative change or an unexpected event, a negative chance, unexpected event. Can you think of ways this event set you on a different path in a positive sense? So an example I can think of is many, many years ago, early in my career, I was offered an opportunity to write some articles for a newsletter. A newsletter editor had contacted my organization and said, gee, we'd love it if you could contribute some articles on a topic that was relevant to the work that we were doing. And my boss passed that opportunity on to me. And I ended up writing some articles for that individual for a few months. I didn't do it for any pay. I just did it for the opportunity. And then once that opportunity kind of started to wind down, I wondered if anybody else would be interested in, articles that I was writing on these topics. So make a long story short, I went to the library, did some research, found a whole bunch of newsletters, and ended up actually generating quite a nice side business in writing for newsletters, and ultimately ended up writing for one of those newsletters as an editor for 18 years. So that's an example of kind of a chance event. It was unplanned. I certainly didn't expect that kind of opportunity to fall into my lap, and I didn't know when I went to the library and did research to find other newsletters. This was in the days before all of that was accessible on the internet. When I went to the library, I didn't know that it was going to lead to writing for all these newsletters, and then I didn't know that one of those would end up employing me for 18 years. So that's an example of planned happenstance. Some little event happens that one day that my boss happened to walk down the hall and say, hey, would you be interested in writing these articles, led to a big change in my life and took me on an interesting and different path than I had planned on. So happenstance learning theory brings a very positive and encouraging approach to the idea of capitalizing on chance events. It helps to replace indecision with open-mindedness, so rather than resisting change, to kind of being open to what comes. As a counselor, you can help clients explore alternatives generated by unexpected events. For example, again, I worked in the outplacement field for a few years where people had been unexpectedly laid off, lost their jobs because of restructuring. And so this sometimes presented clients with an opportunity to explore starting their own business or to think about changing careers. So you may be able to encourage clients to, be open to those ideas that they may not have considered starting their own business or going into a different career. But this experience of being laid off has presented, as a happenstance, has presented this opportunity for them to consider these other aspects. In happenstance learning theory, Krumholtz says that there are 5 helpful skills that clients can can have or that need to draw on if they're going to make the most of their happenstance experiences. So obviously curiosity would be important, exploring opportunities that result from these chance events. Persistence, so learning from setbacks, not getting discouraged, to keep trying. As an example, to keep trying if you're trying to find a job. It can be a very lengthy process to find employment. And so, helping the client to recognize they need to persist, they need to keep working, learn from each experience where they maybe go for a job interview and don't get the job, but to keep trying. Also flexibility, being able to kind of this is a phrase from Krumholtz. I'm a little uncomfortable with this idea of changing your attitude, but just, I think, being flexible and open to dealing with chance events and just accepting, okay, here's the reality of what's happened. Maybe it doesn't feel very good, but what can we take from this situation? What can we, what positive opportunities might we be able to take from this? Also bringing optimism to those experiences, so being willing to pursue new events, finding actions and taking actions that can pay off, and also, of course, risk-taking, so being willing to take chances when responding to unexpected events. So when we think about the risk-taking, it might be as simple as, being willing to talk to somebody at a networking event and never knowing that it might in fact turn into a job opportunity. There are 4 steps that Krumholtz talks about that if you're working from this framework as a career development practitioner, 4 steps that you want to take when you're working with clients. So first of all, normalize the planned happenstance. So although we intellectually usually understand that change is going to happen, unexpected events are going to happen. We may have seen these things happen to people we know. It always somehow feels bigger and different when it happens to us. So it's not to brush it off and say, oh, don't worry about it, lots of people get laid off, but to recognize and help the client recognize that, this is a difficult, but it is part of many people's working lives, and it's a hard experience to go through, but I, as the counselor, am here to support you and help you in developing an action plan, and we're going to talk all of these things through. You want to help clients to see the opportunities for learning and exploration in the situation. So again, being laid off may mean that the individual can go back to school and get trained in an occupation that they've always wanted to try. You can also teach clients to produce desirable chance events. So the example I've been working with here is the idea of networking to create your own chance events, and teach clients to overcome blocks to action. So work with them to figure out, what's getting in the way. If they're nervous about job interviews, then let's take action on that. Let's practice job interviews. Let's practice the questions. Let's drill this until you feel a bit more confident about the job interview process. So just before we finish off, some issues again that you need to be aware of when you're working with clients is to be aware of your own views on planned happenstance and unexpected events. So, you may have a very positive outlook on life and be open to what comes, or maybe not, maybe you're the other way. And if you're working with a client who's very different from you in terms of views about these kinds of experiences, you might influence the client to begin seeing things in a more negative way, or you might be forcing them to try and move to a positive place when they're not ready to go there. So what you need to do is to focus on how the client views an unexpected event, not on how you think they should view it. So using all of the good counseling skills that we're teaching you, empathy and reflection of feeling and reflection of content and all of that, do the best you can to understand where the client is coming from, rather than trying to, for example, force your own perspective. Oh yeah, I know it's hard, but don't worry, it'll all work out. You need to recognize where the client might be emotionally in relation to the event. Remember that concept of being where the client is. So just telling people to feel better and to get over it or to look on the bright side is not going to help in some cases. So you need to recognize that grieving and adjustment to change and transition is a process that takes time, and we talked about all of that earlier in the course. Remember that clients will be on their own schedule and their own timeline in terms of how they are responding to chance events that have happened to them. So that's the end of our lecture on social learning theory, and just a couple of reminders for next week to read chapter 15 for week 11. And you may, just a suggestion, you may want to get started working on your major paper, which is due at the end of week 13 in 3 weeks.